Was this how it was with your parents, huh? Was it? Just because some self-proclaimed holy man said this is what God commands?
It's ruined.
Horror movies can deliver scares through various means: gore, zombies, the paranormal. However, there is something particularly terrifying about cults, a group of people coming together to worship a dark higher power, usually doing anything it takes to appease the dark entity, even sacrificing innocent lives. Coming in at number 5, Rosemary's Baby. Roman Polanski's masterpiece, Rosemary's Baby, set the standard for many cultist horror movies, particularly in the way it reveals the cult, using a steady and slow build and paranoia, confusing us as to what exactly is even happening. This 1968 horror stars Mia Farrow and chronicles the story of a pregnant woman who suspects that an evil cult wants to take her baby for use in their rituals. However, it is quickly revealed that her husband has made a deal with the devil for success in his acting career, and the price is offering up his wife as a surrogate mother for something truly evil: Satan's son. That's right, the cult uses Rosemary as a sacrificial lamb for Satan's grand return through his own offspring, and it is truly terrifying. The general sense of unease throughout the movie is why Rosemary's Baby is an absolute classic, and perhaps one of the scarier movies in the horror genre. The horrors depicted on and off the screen aided in the rumour that the film was actually cursed by the cult and summoned demons, with many incidents occurring off-screen to the cast and crew, including the slaying of Roman Polanski's wife, Sharon Tate, at the hands of the Manson family. Coming in at number 4, VHS 2, Safe Haven. Safe Haven is one of 4 sections in the 2013 anthology found footage sequel VHS 2, with the segment being directed by Timo Tjahjanto and Gareth Hugh Evans, and being the best section in the entirety of the movie. The plot follows a news crew composed of 4 members who infiltrate an Indonesian cult in the hopes of shooting a documentary about their mysterious activities. Inside the building, they find the walls adorned in bizarre symbols, school children in classrooms, and women dressed in white garments. One of the crew, Malik, then overhears that his fiancée Lena is pregnant with another crew member's child, Adam. Things then descend into total madness. The deeper the crew go inside the building, with Lena being abducted by several women, with the cult hunting down the crew members for sacrificial reasons. Now, with only 29 minutes to play with, Evans and Tjahjanto don't hold back, not even for a second, with the segment being insanely action-packed and gore-filled from start to finish. Not to mention it builds to an insane, gore-soaked climax that will shock the audience. Cult are successful in their demon summoning, with the beast making its grand appearance towards the final moments of the movie, and it does not disappoint. Coming in at number 3, we have Children of the Corn. Children in horror movies are already creepy, but put them in a cult composed solely of children, then you have a recipe for absolutely terrifying scares. Children of the Corn, based on the book of the same name by Stephen King, is a supernatural folk horror starring Linda Hamilton and Peter Horton, and is set in a fictitious rural town of Gatlin, Nebraska. The film tells the story of a malevolent entity referred to as He Who Walks Behind the Rose, which entices the town's children to ritually murder all the town's adults and a couple driving across the country to ensure a successful corn harvest. As the couple arrive in the small, seemingly abandoned town, they discover the congregation of children led by a girl named Rachel, with them performing a cultural birthday ritual for Amos by drinking his blood from a pentagram-shaped cut on his body. Amos has turned 19, therefore is considered old enough for his passing, joining their god in the cornfield. Now, while the movie as a whole was a little disappointing, it does deliver on the horrors of cults. Not to mention there were 7 sequels, with the first being far superior. The cult movie in turn gained a cult following, with it being a hit among movie lovers.
Bringing us in at number 2, Happy Science. Happy Science, well, its name definitely doesn't reflect the tone of its actual nature. In fact, as far as terrifying modern cults go, Happy Science is probably near the top of the list. An absolute mishmash mashup of world religions, from New Age hocus pocus to far-right nationalism. The leader of Happy Science, a man named Raihuo Akawa, claims that he's a supreme being called El Canter, a combination of Jesus Christ, the Buddha, and the Prophet Muhammad. Formed in 1986 by the former salaryman, Okawa initially called the group the Godlight Association. His pursuit is to create a 9-dimensional heaven, whatever that may be, with himself at the head of the whole cult of personality shenanigans. Here's the kicker though, the group claims to have over 12 million members worldwide and have also founded their own political wing called the Happiness Realization Party. And here's the crazy part, this group advocates violent Japanese nationalism, denying historical atrocities and advocating for war between China and North Korea. Let's hope they stay just a cult, right? And finally, at our number 1 spot, NXIVM. If you're wanting to find a modern cult that is incredibly recent, then look no further than NXIVM. According to their website, NXIVM is a company whose mission is to raise human awareness, foster an ethical humanitarian civilization, and celebrate what it means to be human. Well, apparently that translates to being at best an abusive pyramid scheme, and at its disgustingly worse, a human trafficking operation and sex cult subsidized by expensive brainwashing. NXIVM and its owners have been indicted on several federal charges, including sex trafficking, and have been accused of being a recruiting platform for a cult operating within it, variously known as DOS or the Vow, where women members in particular were forced into sexual slavery and physical abuse. It's a disgusting modicum of the abuse of power demonstrated at the expense of vulnerable individuals. The cult was founded in 1998 by Keith Raniere, who through several decades of deception managed to coerce over 17,000 under the organization's influence. This has included a huge amount of celebrities, actors, actresses, models, and other public figures. The lid was fully blown open in March 2018 when Raniere was arrested and federally indicted, shortly followed by other important figures in the cult. Well, they go to trial in October 2018. Kicking off at number 5, we have the Oracle of Delphi. At the very centre of the ancient Greek world is a strange, hidden chasm that has been thought as fuel for the netherworld for thousands of years. On the slopes of Mount Parnassus, underneath the colossal Temple of Apollo, the seeds of the Delphic mystery cult came into fruition. In essence, the Oracle of Delphi was a fortune teller, the high priestess of the temple, known as the Pythia, which in ancient Greek translates as the verb to rot, in reference to the slain, monstrous python at the centre of their belief. The Pythia would sit above a huge chasm deep in the bowels of the temple and breathe in a concoction from the depths below, thought to give her hallucinogenic properties that would induce prophecy. So accurate were her predictions though that the Pythia was thought to be the most influential woman in the classical world. Whoever held the title would go on to influence the decisions of Alexander the Great, Croesus, and King Leonidas, just to name a few. Coming in at number 4, we have Mithraism. Also known as the Mithraic Mysteries, this ancient Roman cult was centered on the god Mithras, an ancient Persian god which is also tied to the Sanskrit Mitra, a god of the sun. Now, if we're talking the stereotypical aspects of a cult, then this is where it all started. Strange, complex sets of initiations, secret handshakes, and bizarre, ordained meetings in hidden underground temples. You know the stuff. A lot of them are still around today actually, one of the best preserved being in London, England, of all places. Just a few steps away from the Bank of England is London's Mithraeum, where ancient Roman soldiers would meet in secrecy and whisper the name of their god. But what's so scary about that? You know, sounds harmless enough. Well, these guys were totally obsessed with Mithras slaying the bull and ritualistically reenacted it whenever they got the chance with live animals and the consumption of flesh. Gradually, this got a little bit out of hand and people became part of the menu. Yep. Cannibalism. Also a little bit scary, but many people believe that the Mithraic cult is still around today, just lurking somewhere in the shadows, probably London.
Coming in at number 2, we have Hereditary. One of 2 Ari Aster movies on our list, Hereditary was a surprise horror movie, with the reveal of its cult being kept a secret for much of the movie, making it incredibly unexpected when it begins to unfold. Released in 2018, Hereditary is Ari Aster's directorial debut, with it starring Toni Collette and Alex Wolff as a family haunted by a mysterious presence after the death of their secretive grandmother. However, what begins as a sober family drama very quickly descends into a crazy supernatural horror, What begins as a slow burn quickly catapults into a disturbing horror after an incident involving the family's son and daughter, leaving viewers covering their mouths. As a result of the incident, the mother, Annie, is forced to turn to a support group member, Jones, for support, learning ways she can contact the realm of the supernatural. However, this has devastating consequences, with her awakening something that should never have been awoken. Viewers very quickly learn that a demon-worshipping cult are the true causes of the family's misery and pain. Worse still, Ari Aster plants Easter eggs throughout the movie as a way of warning us of things to come. However, saying that, most of us may have missed these subliminal messages, but what I can say is, the wall-crawling demon was revealed long before the last 30 minutes of the movie, with the cult being there all along, watching the family and waiting for their moment. The cult in Hereditary are worshippers of Paimon, one of Lucifer's most obedient devotees, who rules 200 legions of angels, and is connected to the Tree of Death, hence why the treehouse in Hereditary is so important. The summoning of Paimon is gradual throughout the movie, but when he finally arrives and seeks solace in the body of one of the characters, well, it's enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Midsommar. There are a few things more terrifying than a cult in horror movies. A group of people devoted to a dark high power who will do absolutely anything to appease the deity. No movie displays this as effectively as Ari Aster's Midsommar. Released in 2019, Midsommar is a folk horror film starring My Queen, Florence Pugh, and follows a group of friends who travel to Sweden for a festival that occurs once every 90 years, only to find themselves in the clutches of a pagan cult. Now, unlike Ari Aster's Hereditary, Midsommar lays out its intentions from the very start of the movie. The movie kicks off with Dani discovering the death of both her sister and parents, with the incident putting a strain on Dani's relationship with her already distant boyfriend Christian. Not long after, she learns that Christian has planned a trip to Sweden with his friends to attend a midsummer celebration at an ancestral commune, so the group packs up and heads out. Things very quickly descend into madness, with the group arriving and being met by a large group of white cult members in a very peculiar white outfit, with Dani realizing that something isn't quite right here. However, her concerns are proven correct when 2 commune elders die by senicide via leaping from a cliff top. When the male elder survives the fall, the cult mimics his wails of agony and crushes his skull with a mallet. Yeah, things aren't fun in Sweden right now. Now, without ruining much more for those who haven't watched it yet, the cult does what is necessary to summon the dark higher power that they worship, with the American tourist being used as a sacrifice for the demon. Now, more interesting still, while this movie isn't entirely based on a real cult, director Ari Aster does describe it as a stew of sorts. I quote, "We're drawing from actual Swedish traditions. We're drawing from Swedish folklore. We're drawing from Norse mythology." All in all, Midsommar successfully draws on the disturbing conventions of cultist horror to generate a sense of dread and unease, making it my favourite folk horror movie and cult horror movie of all time.
Kicking off at number 5, we have the Church of Bible Understanding. Founded in 1971 by Stuart Trail, this communal organisation was originally known as the Forever Family at its home location of Allentown in Pennsylvania. It gathered steam in the late 70s after moving its headquarters to New York, where it developed a controversial network of churches and communes and amassed over 100,000 members at its peak. Bizarrely enough, Trail's motive was to encourage members to break off contact with their families, forcing them into their communal lifestyle and working essentially as free labour for a number of businesses. These included a carpet cleaning business and a used van venture. The group has been accused of being a cult on numerous occasions, and it's suspected that their leader, Stuart Trail, became a multi-millionaire from the exploitation of young, vulnerable adults. In later years, after a string of controversies, its members dwindled to a few hundred, but recently in 2013, the church was accused of gross misconduct at a number of their orphanages in Haiti, despite claiming to spend $2.5 million on their upkeep annually. Next up at number 4, Raelism. One of the most notorious cults in modern history, Raelism began in 1974 after a Frenchman named Claude Vauquelin claimed he'd had a vision of an alien spacecraft descending over southern France. He said that the craft was filled with strange beings that told him humans were the only hope for the future of the universe, and then handed him a Bible. Apparently, he was there for over 6 days, and the head alien, coincidentally named Yahweh, explained that the Old Testament is actually a record of humanity's early days, and that he needed to construct an embassy ready for the aliens when they would eventually return to inhabit Earth. Sounds pretty kooky, right? Well, for the next 3 decades, his teachings amassed a following of over 20,000 people, where they essentially worshipped aliens, opposed violence, championed science, and participated in mass orgies. Whatever floats your boat, I guess. Well, things got even weirder in 2002 when the cult claimed to have done the impossible and cloned a human, a baby girl named Eve. Of course, everyone went nuts. Even the White House got involved. Lawsuits were filed, but the Raelists stuck to their guns and still to this very day claim to be still producing human clones. Coming in at number 3, Congregation for the Light. Now, the majority of this list are organizations that are happily out in the open, that try and amass as many members as they can, get under their leadership. Well, these guys like to do things a little bit differently. Strangely enough though, they like to be out in the open, avoiding the backwater compounds synonymous with many other cults, and instead having their headquarters deep in the heart of Manhattan. They're controlled by one all-powerful leader, Tom Bear, a 73-year-old Ohio native who denies that the light is a cult. He preaches bizarre racial theories regarding Aryans and Atlantis, preps his people for a doomsday event, speaks about complex mythology involving owls and squirrels, and has an all-powerful grip on the relationships and love lives of its members. The Congregation of the Light is an incredibly small cult, having only roughly 200 members, but the scary thing is how secluded the group are, with the majority of them being born into the light. And next at number 3, the cult of Isis. Popping over to ancient Egypt, the phrase death cult doesn't get more death-y than the cult of Isis. Incredibly popular with ancient Grecian and Roman society, the goddess Isis was central in the Old Kingdom's Osiris myth, where her husband, the divine king Osiris, was slain and resurrected by her hand. The mysteries of Isis were strangely popular in the ancient world, where initiates to the cult would undergo elaborate ritual purification before being brought into the innermost part of Isis' temple. The catch though was that they had to pledge their mortal soul to the goddess of rebirth. Sounds innocent enough, eh? But this often meant that somewhere, someone along the line was getting ritualistically sacrificed. Never good. Swinging in at number 2, Asherism. We've covered these guys quite regularly in our demon series, but if you didn't know, Asherism is pretty gnarly business. Known as the national cult of the Assyrian people, where the majority of ancient Assyria chose to worship a polytheistic religion with thousands of different gods, similar to that of ancient Babylonia. They shared many creation myths to that of Judaism and Christianity, such as the Great Flood and the Tower of Babel. But what separates Asherism is its fascination with demonism and their willingness to worship. For example, the tale of Lilith, Adam's first wife, who went on to become the demonic queen of the succubi. Although you could argue that this is just in essence a collection of smaller cults, Asherism didn't come into written fruition until after the fall of the Assyrian Empire, where these cults were continued to be worshipped in the surviving city of Assur. This became a melting pot for Asherism, with the cults of Sin, Nikal, Bel, Nabu, and Tammuz being twisted into a fervent blend of godhood and demonism. Mass ritualistic sacrifice, stake burnings, cannibalism, it all went down here, and it's not good. And finally, at number 1, the Knights Templar. This wouldn't be an ancient cult list without everybody's favourite shadowy secret society, the Knights Templar. Also known as the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, that's a mouthful, the Knights Templar were a Catholic military order recognised in 1139 by the papal bull of the Holy See. Although records state that the Templar were active until about 1312, the order's main functionality was prominence in Christian finance. They managed a large economic infrastructure throughout the Christian world, developing financial techniques that would later become an early form of banking. In essence, they were the world's first multinational corporation, which has led many people to believe that they're still around to this very day, just in another form. Cue conspiracy music. Their initiation rites are still shrouded in secrecy, where outsiders were discouraged from attending the ceremony over fear of its sensitive nature. This led to the suspicion of medieval inquisitors and eventually the acquisition and execution of over 90% of the order's members, who were burned at the stake. Well, what did they discover? Well, No one really knows. But it constituted a pretty harsh response from the church.
Number 5. The Manson family. Starting out with the most famous of the cults on this list, we have the group of young people who fell under the spell of Charles Manson in the late 1960s in California, USA. Charles Manson was in and out of prison for most of his life before settling in San Francisco and beginning to establish himself as a guru during the height of the Summer of Love hippie culture. Using some elements from the philosophy of the Process Church of Final Judgment, who believed that at the end of the world, Jesus and Satan would join forces to judge humanity, Manson formed a group of mostly young women, teaching them that they were reincarnations of the original Christians, and that he was Jesus Christ. In a converted school bus, the group made their way to Los Angeles, where Manson preached and continued to grow his group of followers. They stayed in the home of Dennis Wilson, of the Beach Boys, for a time, before eventually moving them to an old disused Western movie set, Spawn Ranch. In exchange for the company of the many female followers, the owner of the ranch, George Spawn, allowed Manson and his growing family to stay at the ranch free of charge. Manson began using his followers for extortion, taking a music teacher who they believed had inherited a large fortune hostage in his home and demanding that he join the cult and turn over the money. The man maintained that they were mistaken, and Manson attacked him with a sword before having one of his followers finish the job. In the cult's most famous incident, Manson sent 4 family members to the home of Hollywood actress Sharon Tate with instructions for them to end the lives of Tate and her 4 guests who were staying with her. The next night, these family members were joined by 3 others and brought by Manson to the home of Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, where they broke in and tied up the 2 residents at Manson's instructions. He then ordered them to dispatch the victims and left. Although it hasn't been conclusively proven, the Manson family are believed to be responsible for at least 15 other people, with Manson himself claiming at one point that he was responsible for 35 total deaths. Manson was apprehended and put on trial along with the family members who had carried out his orders, but the trial showed just what a hold Manson still had over his family. Family members showed up outside the courthouse where they held a vigil while armed with hunting knives. They threatened witnesses, setting fire to one man's van while he was still inside it. The trial itself was also a wild time, with one of the defense attorneys who Manson disagreed with going missing and being discovered murdered, and Manson at one point leaping over a table to try and attack the judge while the other defendants began chanting in Latin. Manson and the murderous family members were sent to prison in 1971. Manson remained in prison until his death in 2017. Number 4. Aum Shinrikyo. This Japanese doomsday cult started out as a simple yoga and meditation class, which was founded by Shoko Asahara, using his bizarre interpretations of various forms of Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, yoga, and the works of Nostradamus. In 1992, Shoko published a book that claimed that he was not only Christ, but Japan's only enlightened master. He claimed that he had the ability to take away the sins and bad deeds of his followers and transfer spiritual power to them. As is the case in a lot of cults, he claimed that doomsday was fast approaching and that everyone except his followers would be killed. The movement grew, eventually getting enough members to be considered an official religion. Membership continued to grow, but rumblings began emerging that some members were being tricked into joining, were being forced to donate large sums of money, being held against their will, and in one case even murdered when they tried to leave. An anti-cult lawyer tried to sue the group and soon went missing with his wife and child. Things escalated even further in 1993 when the group tried to use a machine to pump anthrax onto a neighborhood in Tokyo. Although thankfully, the group had stolen the wrong type of anthrax and no one was hurt. Due to the failure of the anthrax, the group began manufacturing sarin and VX nerve gas, which they used in their subsequent attacks. In 1994, the group used a converted refrigerator truck to release the gas on a neighborhood where judges, who were presiding over a lawsuit against the group, lived. 500 people were injured and 8 died, but the attack was not linked to the cult at the time. A few months later, the brother of a member who had escaped was kidnapped, dispatched by the group, and disposed of with a microwave-powered incinerator. He had left a note saying that should he go missing, the group was responsible. Asahara was trying to manufacture weapons, and in order to distract the police, had some of his followers carry out a devastating attack. On March 20th, 1995, Aum members boarded 5 separate trains in Tokyo's subway system and released sarin gas, resulting in 13 people dying, 54 being seriously injured, and between 980 80 and 6,000 people being hurt. This distraction backfired, and the police raided the group's base at the foot of Mount Fuji and discovered explosives, weapons, biological warfare agents, and even a Russian military helicopter. Over 150 cult members were arrested. The next month, a burning paper bag containing a hydrogen cyanide device was found and defused. Had it not been found in time, over 10,000 people could have died. Several other similar devices were found in the days following, and more disasters were averted. Asahara was eventually arrested as his cult continued to attack people connected with the investigation, sending bombs in the mail to the governor, resulting in his secretary's fingers being blown off. In October of 1995, the group was stripped of its religious status and went bankrupt, but it managed to rebrand and still operates in a limited capacity to this day. Asahara and the 12 other cult members who had been found responsible for the attacks were arrested and held until their executions in 2018.
Number 5 on this list is Happy Science. Kind of a fun name that they have there for sure, but maybe not the funnest of cults. Ranker says if you're looking for a mashup of world religions, New Age, hokum, far-right nationalism, and infrastructure spending, then Japanese cult Happy Science is for you. It was founded in 1986 by Ryoho Okawa, a former salaryman who was enraptured by a group called the Godlight Association. He soon formed his own cult of personality called Science of Happiness and changed its name to Happy Science a few years later. Okawa believes he is the human incarnation of a supreme being called El Kenter who combines Christ, Buddha, Muhammad, and every other prophetic deity to create a 9-dimensional heaven with him at the head. He's also created a massively complex mythology of New Age nonsense while simultaneously founding a political wing called the Happiness Realization Party. Here's where the strangeness goes into overdrive though, as his party advocates a vicious Japanese nationalism devoted to denying historical cruelties, advocating conflict with China and North Korea, and rebuilding Japan's infrastructure. The group claims to have 12 million members around the world, has a multimedia arm, and enjoys tax-exempt status in the US. So basically, if it was up to this group, Japan would be invading China and North Korea and probably well on its way to starting World War III. So yeah, definitely not one that you want to be a part of because that could obviously get very bad very quickly. Not to mention you need to worship this dude who believes that he's the human incarnation of all these cool people. I mean, if he actually is the human reincarnation of all of those people, then that's freaking awesome, but come on guys, I think the likelihood that this dude is Jesus as well as Buddha is pretty low. Number 4 on this list is the Brethren. Yeah, so joining this cult really would just be the worst, guys. You just need to give up so much to do it. Ranker says, also known as Body of Christ and Garbage Eaters, the Brethren are an apocalyptic offshoot of the 70s Jesus movement, eschewing worldly possessions and earthly pleasures to purify themselves for the coming end of the world. Brethren members essentially live as vagrants doing odd jobs to survive, eating trash, avoiding bathing and medical treatment, and giving whatever money they do make to the group. They also forbid dancing and laughing until the return of Jesus, bar members from communicating with family, and forbid contact between binary genders. Group founder Jim Roberts passed in December 2015, leaving the future of the secretive cult unclear. You literally need to give up everything in your entire life to get ready for when Jesus returns. I just don't get this one, guys. Like, maybe it's because I'm not part of this cult, but I guess it isn't clear to me why Jesus would be angry that you have earthly possessions. Like, what does he have against you having the occasional knickknack, you know? Also, there's the whole thing where you literally need to eat garbage. I don't think that they're joking about that, guys. Like, you will be eating scraps if you join this cult. Never having a warm meal again, that's about as terrifying as it can get.
Coming in at 3, The Shelter Cycle by Peter Rock. Inspired by true events, The Shelter Cycle, written by Peter Rock, tells the story of 2 children, Francine and Colville, who grew up in the Church Universal and Triumphant, a religion that predicted the world would come to an end in the late 1980s. While their parents built underground shelters to withstand the impending Soviet missile strike, Francine and Colville played in the Montana wilderness where invisible spirits watched over them. However, when the apocalypse does not occur, the sect's members are forced to resurface and grow up in a world they believed might no longer exist. Now, the depiction of the cult is harrowing harrowing, but what makes the book more unsettling is the depiction of someone who has survived it. Someone who, having lost his rudder, might be capable of absolutely anything. Now, as outsiders, we believe that when people escape a cult, they are safe, right? However, Peter Rock turns this on its head and examines how cults continue to live inside of us, evolving and changing over time. Coming in at 2, The Girls by Emma Cline. The Girls is a 2016 debut novel by Emma Cline and is loosely inspired by the Manson family and the murder of actress Sharon Tate. The novel itself is set in 1969 and focuses on 14-year-old Evie Boyd, who feels isolated and unloved and ends up spending the majority of that summer with a group of teenage girls on a ranch who are all devoted to a man named Russell. Now, the novel never explicitly states that it's talking about the Manson murders, but it's obvious to almost everyone who reads it. Cline also gives intimate insight into adolescence, desire, and the grotesque lengths some are willing to go in order to feel like they belong. Now, for those who don't know, the Manson family was a desert commune and cult led by Charles Manson that was active in California in the late 1960s and early 70s. The group consisted of 100 of his followers who lived an unconventional lifestyle with habitual use of hallucinogenic drugs. Now, on the evening of August 8, 1969, 4 members of the Manson family invaded the home of actress Sharon Tate and movie director Roman Polanski and murdered Tate, who was almost 9 months pregnant at the time, along with 3 friends who were visiting and an 18-year-old visitor who was slain as he was leaving the home. The Manson family were brutal and absolutely abhorrent, so if you want to read a fictional depiction of the group, check out The Girls. And finally, coming in at number 1, Jonestown and Other Madness by Pat Parker. Now, backstory before we get into the meat of the book by Pat Parker. On November 18th, 1978, a total of nearly 918 people died in a settlement at the nearby airstrip in Port Kaituma and at a temple-run building in Georgetown. Now, the People's Temple Agricultural Project, better known by its informal name, Jonestown, was a remote settlement established by the People's Temple, a cult under the leadership of Jim Jones. In total, around 909 individuals died in Jonestown, all but 2 from apparent cyanide poisoning in an event that has been referred to as a revolutionary suicide by Jones and some of his cult. Now, let's track back. Jones had founded what became the People's Temple in Indiana in the 1950s, then relocated his congregation to California in the 60s. In the 70s, however, following negative media attention, the preacher moved with around 1,000 of his followers to the Guineas jungle, where he promised a utopian community. That is not what they received, because as aforementioned, on the day of November 18, 1978, US Representative Leo Ryan, who had gone to Jonestown to investigate claims of abuse, was murdered along with 4 members of his delegation by Jonestown gunmen. That very same day, Jones ordered his followers to ingest poison-laced punch, while armed guards watched on. Now, in the book Jonestown and Other Madness by Pat Parker, she examines the rise and fall of the charismatic turned murderous preacher Jim Jones. As a celebrated lesbian feminist poet, Pat Parker's collection is a gripping reflection on the way race, class, and gender played into Jim Jones's sadistic slaughter of his congregation. Throughout the book, she challenges us to reflect on how easily we accept answers given to us in the wake of a tragedy. I quote, "If 900 white people had gone to a country with a black minister and committed suicide, would we have accepted the answer we were given so easily?" The book is fantastic and incredibly moving. Not just that, but it's also the perfect insight into one of the most notorious cults and infamous massacres.
Number 3 on this list is the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You guys might be familiar with this one right now, as it's currently very popular. Netflix just released a documentary about this cult, so if you want a more in-depth summary of what went down, definitely go check that out. Ranker says that this cult was an offshoot of Mormonism that's constantly in the news for unsavory reasons. FLDS openly embraces polygamy, which the mainstream LDS outlawed a century ago. The group has anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 members in rural Utah and Arizona, with the group having almost total control of 2 small, linked border towns in 2 states. While Mormon splinter groups had been around long before, the FLDS was incorporated in 1991 by a group of men who had been excommunicated by the church. They went through a range of leaders who all declared themselves prophets until being taken over by Rulon Jeffs in 2002. He passed shortly thereafter and his son Warren took over. It was under Warren Jeffs that the FLDS practices of child marriage, bigamy, incest, racism, abandonment of teenage boys all became public knowledge. Jeffs was sent to prison in 2007 but continues to be the de facto head of the church while his successors squabble for power. This cult certainly isn't as powerful as it once was, and you have to imagine that as time goes on and more people are educated on what this cult did in the past, that will continue on a downward trajectory. But for now, they still aren't totally finished, and if you wanted to, then you could join this group. Absolutely do not do that though, because these people get up to some very weird and often illegal things. Like the leader was literally sent to jail and is still there rotting away. I would not want to get myself into a situation where I'm anywhere close to the people that support that guy. Number 2 on this list is the Nuwaubian Nation. This one is absolutely nuts, guys, so strap in. Ranker says, formerly known as the United Nuwaubian Nation of Moors, this is a cult of personality based around founder Dwight York. Combining Christianity, ancient Egyptian iconography, African rituals, and a belief that aliens are coming, the nation believes that 144,000 chosen people will be taken away in a flying city, spirited to Orion to prepare for the final fight against Satan. Shockingly, York's mishmash of New Age concepts, black power militancy, and ancient Egyptian religion caught on in both the hip-hop community and in rural Georgia, where York built a massive compound made with donated funds. York's mythology grew, incorporating cloning, racial theory, cosmology, anti-government conspiracies, and linguistics. Even as the cult grew, York was under investigation, and he was finally detained in 2002 for running a massive human trafficking ring comprising as many as 1,000 individuals. He was sent to prison for life, and his compound was seized and demolished. The group still exists, though in much smaller numbers. If we just ignore all of the human rights violations for a second, which we shouldn't by the way, but let's just do it anyways for one moment, then at the best possible case scenario, you join this cult and then dedicate your life preparing for a battle with Satan that you may not ever have, because not only is that crazy, but you might not even be in the 140,000 people who gets picked to have said battle with Satan. Like, this just doesn't make any sense at all, guys. Then we add back on all of those human rights violations and all the other stuff that York was sent to jail for, and you get one sick and twisted cocktail that is this cult. Number 1 on this list is Church Universal and Triumphant. Yet another cult of personality in New Age clothes, the CUT was founded in 1975 as an offshoot of a different movement, Summit Lighthouse. Founder Elizabeth Clare Prophet pitched herself and her husband as messengers of the Ascended Masters, a set of spiritually awakened ancient beings central to the Theosophy belief system. They also threw in elements of Christian Science, the I Am movement, and Mormon-style doomsday prepping. The prophets grew wealthy enough to buy large spreads in the Santa Monica Mountains and Montana, while members drove themselves into debt building fallout shelters and paying huge sums of money to reserve a spot in the post-nuclear conflict society. The church was also accused of making illicit straw purchases and of using sleep deprivation against members who attempted to leave. In ill health, the prophet retired in 1999 and passed 10 years later. Since then, the church has gone through legal problems and succession squabbles, but members still meet on a regular basis. So yeah, just join this cult if you want to potentially get tortured from sleep deprivation. Oh, and while we're torturing you, we're also gonna take all your money and invest it into some underground bunker that you'll probably never use. If that doesn't sound like an excellent use of time and money to you, which it probably shouldn't, then I really wouldn't recommend joining this cult. Number 5 on this list is Sarah Edmondson. Sarah Edmondson is a Canadian actress who's known for her roles on The Vow, Geronimo Stilton, and At Home in Mitford. She's also known for having been part of a cult. Listverse says, Sarah Edmondson, a young actress, had been searching for a newfound purpose in her life when she boarded a cruise designed to explore spirituality. She did not know that it was a front for the infamous cult NXIVM, nor did she know that it would dictate the next 12 years of her life. During her time in the cult, she climbed the ladder into a position that gave her immense wealth. The power she found herself in was exciting, and it was not until she was inducted into the secret subgroup of the cult that it didn't feel like a positive experience. When she was branded with the letters of the founding members of the cult, she decided that she'd had enough. She became a whistleblower on the cult, drawing worldwide attention to the famous actors and actresses involved in the pyramid scheme and trafficking cult. Sarah Edmondson went on to write a book, Scarred, but it's a bit troubling. She lured many young women into the cult, but her book seems strangely void of guilt or remorse. Instead, her writing is self-indulgent and gossip-filled. Though she was certainly abused within the cult, she was not blameless for her own wrongdoings. Interesting. If what Listverse says is true, then Sarah might not have been completely from blame for some of the stuff that happened in this cult. I looked into some of what the cult did, and it was not good, guys. This cult was rotten to the core. The founder, Keith Raniere, finally got his though. He was recently sentenced to 120 years in prison. Number 4 on this list is Briell Decker. Briell's story is one that is truly moving. Briell is a true hero. Not only did she escape the fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints cult, she established a refuge at the cult headquarters after the cult leader was arrested. FLDS, a polygamous cult, was led by Warren Jeffs. During his reign, he forced approximately 80 women and children into marriages. Briell, who was born into the FLDS, knew from a young age that she would be forced to marry the middle-aged man. When she turned 18, he prepared their wedding ceremony and she had no choice but to go along with it. Around this time, the FBI charged Jeffs for forcing an underage girl into marriage and later conducted a raid on the FLDS compound where they discovered just how many children Jeffs had forced into marriage. Jeffs was, of course, charged and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The $100 million FLDS fund, which was seized by the government, was partially given to Briell to buy Jeffs' mansion and turn it into a refuge for victims. Even though she went through some really horrible stuff, Decker's character remained intact. And now she's taken the experience that happened to her and turned it into a way to help all the others who were affected. Big shout out to Briell.
Coming in at number 5, Gather the Daughters by Jenny Melamed. Jenny Melamed's debut novel, Gather the Daughters, transports readers to a post-apocalyptic colony ruled by tyrannical men. The futuristic community is shaped by sexism, censorship, and government-mandated procreation. The book has been compared to The Handmaid's Tale due to its depiction of female servitude. Now, as the novel's heroines come of age, they are confronted with depravity of the colony's traditions, and thanks to specific occurrences, a rebellion is sparked. Now, unlike The Handmaid's Tale, we're given very little information about life beyond the island the cult is residing on, with Melamed keeping us in the dark and just as frustrated as her characters. It's a captivating novel that inspires but at times sickens, but is mostly a meditation on the dangers of misogyny and fear. In at number 4, Underground, The Tokyo Gas Attack and the Japanese Psyche by Haruki Murakami. Published between 1997 and 1998, Underground is a book by Japanese novelist Haruki Murakami about the 1995 Aum Shinrikyo sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway. The attack was an act of domestic terrorism perpetrated on 20th of March 1995 by members of the cult movement Aum Shinrikyo. In 5 coordinated attacks, the cult members released sarin on 3 lines of the Tokyo Metro during rush hour, killing 13 people, severely injuring 50 and causing temporary vision problems for nearly 1,000 others. The cult, which was led by Shoko Asahara, had already carried out several other assassinations and terror attacks using sarin, and had also produced several other nerve agents including VX and attempted to produce botulinum toxin. In the raid that followed the attack, police arrested many senior members of the cult, with over 200 members being arrested. To this day, the attack remains the deadliest terror attack in Japan. Now, Murakami's novel is made up of a series of interviews with individuals who were affected by the attacks, and the English translation also includes interviews with members of Aum, the religious cult responsible for the attacks. In the novel, he attempts to make sense of the horrific attacks, and in turn is a true testament to the resilience of the human spirit.
Number 3. Heaven's Gate. Not to be confused with the 1980 Western that flopped so hard that the director-driven film era in Hollywood was brought to an end. Heaven's Gate was an American religious movement founded in 1974 by Bonnie Nettles in Marshall Applewhittem, otherwise known as T and Doe. T met Doe while working at a hospital in 1972 when Doe was visiting a sick friend. Doe was really into biblical prophecy and upon meeting the woman felt that she was so familiar that they must have met in a past life. On the other hand, she claimed that aliens had told her that they would one day meet and that they had a divine mission to accomplish. You know, just like the Blues Brothers. The two studied religious and science fiction texts together, eventually coming to the logical conclusion that Doe was a reincarnated Jesus and that they had been chosen to fulfill the prophecies of the Bible and that they had been given higher higher-level minds than most folks, and were the two witnesses described in the Book of Revelations. They were pretty sure that they would die and be resurrected, at which point a UFO would show up and take them away. They had trouble getting followers until they began advertising meetings where they claimed that aliens wanted volunteers for an experiment, which would result in the subjects being brought to a higher evolutionary level. They recruited over 100 members who they traveled the country with before becoming reclusive. Bonnie Nettles, aka T, died of liver cancer in 1985, and Marshall Applewhite, aka Doe, became the sole leader of the group. In 1996, the group rented a home in Rancho Santa Fe in California, which they referred to as the Monastery. In 1997, Doe made a video message claiming that they had to evacuate Earth by taking their own lives as Heaven's Gate was closing, and by dying, they would be taken by a UFO to a higher level of existence. Doe and 38 other cult members then dressed in identical black shirts with armbands that read Heaven's Gate Away Team, as an extremely macabre Star Trek reference. All of them were also wearing Nike Decades, as the group apparently had adopted the company's slogan of Just Do It as a personal slogan. The group then covered their heads with plastic bags and asphyxiated. They did this in 3 tiers so that the remaining members could take off their bags and arrange their bodies with dignity. In an interesting bit of trivia, in the aftermath of this incident, the Nike Decades have become a highly sought after collector's item due to their involvement in the incident, because of course they are. Number 2. The People's Temple Agricultural Project. Founded by Jim Jones in Indiana in 1955, the People's Temple preached that those who remained drugged with the opiate of religion had to be brought to enlightenment with socialism. Of course, this wasn't the fun Bernie Sanders socialism where everyone gets to go to college. Jordan's main influences were people like Chairman Mao and Joseph Stalin. He was driven out of Indiana due to having integrationist beliefs and went to California, where he became involved in local politics, helping George Moscone become mayor of San Francisco in 1975. As a result, Jones was made the chairman of the city's Housing Authority Commission, which allowed him to rub elbows with the wealthy and powerful. After some backlash from local newspapers and fears of a police crackdown, the group set up a commune in Guyana, which was a small and poor enough and independent enough country that Jones thought he would be able to easily get political influence and protection. With the approval of the local government, the group began building their commune, which they called Jonestown. He made a deal with the government that would allow hundreds of cult members to enter the country, but very difficult for them to leave. At its peak, Jonestown had about 900 people living in the small commune. Jones became more and more unhinged, controlling the media the group were allowed to consume, lest they be subjected to a movie that wasn't pro-Marxist. He made everyone in the commune work long shifts, 6 days a week. He continued to brainwash and manipulate his people, telling them that they would soon be under attack by the CIA and should prepare to eventually take their own lives as a form of revolutionary protest, and had them guard the entrances of Jonestown with machine guns and machetes. As concerns from family members in the states grew, investigations into Jonestown began. When a delegation of investigators, reporters, and concerned relatives went to visit the commune, they were able to convince a few members to defect. As they tried to return to the states on 2 planes, one of the defectors produced a handgun and began opening fire on the other passengers. At the same time, a tractor trailer stormed the airstrip, with the passengers of the trailer producing shotguns and firing at the planes, with none on board surviving. While this was happening, Jones had a cocktail of poisons mixed into a large tub of grape Flavor-Aid, and had the 909 residents drink it and take their own lives. Despite the fact that it was Flavor-Aid that was used by Jones, the incident was the source of the expression, drink the Kool-Aid. Number 1. The Thuggee Cult. The Thuggee were a secret society operating in India in the mid-1800s who were known for attacking travelers and garroting them with a weapon called a rumal. Its members were trained from childhood in its use. They considered efficient and quiet acts of murder to be the greatest accomplishment possible. They would follow groups of travelers until they made camp, at which point they would attack. Word of the Thuggee began to grow as numerous bodies began to be discovered in wells around the countryside. However, the Thuggee were not attacking their victims simply to take their valuables. The number 1 rule of the cult was not to shed any of their victims' blood, as they were actually human sacrifices for their god, Kali. The Thuggee believed that constant indulgence in vices was the only way to become closer to and achieve union with their god. During the time that the cult was active, over 30,000 people were attacked by the Thuggee and sacrificed to Kali. British officers were tasked with eliminating the cult and began mapping out the cult's attacks in order to predict where the attacks would likely take place and set traps for the Thuggee while disguised as merchants and travelers. Between 1830 and 1841, at least 3,700 cult members were captured, effectively ending the group. Many were put in prison for the rest of their lives, with 500 of them being hanged. Without exception, all of them that went to the gallows showed no emotion or remorse, often requesting to put on their own nooses themselves. When asked if he was sorry, one member who claimed to have the Thuggee record for most victims at 931 responded that no one should ever feel bad for following their trade. The term thug is still used to this day to describe a brutal criminal, and the group is remembered for their various appearances as villains in films over the years, such as when they were depicted by Steven Spielberg in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Kicking off at number 5, Children of the Corn, 1984.
He wants you too, Malachi.
Which is perhaps everyone's first horror brush with the concept of a strange fanatical cult of demonic, corn-zealous children out in the deep rural fields of Nebraska, which is oddly specific, but Children of the Corn is also iconic for a reason. See, the thing is though, despite some terrible acting and questionable special effects, this film worked at the time and still works to this day because of its concept. It's like Lord of the Flies meets The Omen. What if the children of a small rural town were corrupted by a demonic overlord? Children of the Corn is the answer to that question. Directed by Fritz Kirsch and written by George Goldsmith, the movie itself is based on the short story of the same name by Stephen King, and admittedly, it takes many liberties with King's narrative structure. But, and this is a big but, it's hard not to produce a cult classic 80s slasher when you have the basic recipe of the real core of this film. Creepy kids in wide-brimmed hats wielding scythes and staring out from behind the rows of corn, seeking more adults to slay to sacrifice to their aptly Kingian bloodthirsty deity. In fact, it's hard not to go wrong, especially when you have the incredibly unnerving performance from the then child actor John Franklin as the genuinely unsettling Isaac Kroner. Oh, and of course a direct reference to He Who Walks Behind the Rose, aka Randall Flagg himself. Like many of Stephen King's fictional works, Children of the Corn is a cautionary tale on the dangers of delusion and organised corruption, and that's why it's so damn good. Next up at number 4, The Ritual, 2017. And whilst that scene was absolutely hilarious in an otherwise horrifying movie, it doesn't water down the fact that the bizarre Jotun cult in 2017's The Ritual is one of the most original and downright disconcerting depictions of a fanatical band of sacrificial followers in recent times. And all it took was an immortal, mythological Scandinavian troll god and all of his faithful withered followers to set the scene. If you haven't seen 2017's The Ritual, then there may be a few spoilers already lurking in this list, but as far as modern horror movies go, The Ritual sets itself apart with its wholehearted originality, but more importantly, it's a resounding formula of misdirection and confusion, because nothing says horror than uttering the phrase, "What the hell is going on and who are these creepy folks nailing people to trees?" Directed by David Bruckner with a screenplay from Joe Barton, 2017's The Ritual is a tale based on the novel of the same name written by Adam Neville. And although the movie takes a few liberties in terms of narrative structure, the visual representation of an ancient forest in northern Sweden lends itself incredibly well to the mythological mystery that it permeates. You see, it works because we don't really need to know how or why this ancient forest is populated by a bunch of Jotun worshipping fanatics. We just need to get out of said forest and survive. And that makes for some terrifying horror viewing.
Number 5, The Brethren. Do you feel like the modern world has got you down? Got you running around feeling overwhelmed? Perhaps you need a break from it all and you want to get away. I want to go back to a simpler time. Well then perhaps The Brethren is the movement you've been looking for. Founded by Jim T. Roberts, the movement seeks to shed all of the convenience and accommodations of modern living, with its members instead choosing to live as vagrants, drifting on the edge of society, away from the prying eye of the modern world. Their leader believes that in order to be guaranteed a spot in heaven, one must purify themselves. And to the Brethren, this means purifying themselves of just about every facet of modern living. As part of their renouncement of all modern living, Brethren must forsake all of their family, friends, their jobs, their livelihoods, all in favor of their new brothers. You aren't allowed to partake in any material goods of any kind. Sew your own clothing and eat what you can scavenge. This particularly grisly habit is what gave the cult its enduring nickname of garbage eaters for their tendency to dumpster dive. You're not even allowed to laugh, celebrate, or play, as all celebrations must be saved for the return of the Savior at the end of the world. Although given those conditions, I'm not sure what you'd have to laugh about. It goes as far too as members being barred from receiving treatment or medicine, even for common curable illnesses. Because members are forced to cut themselves off from their families, oftentimes members disappear without their family members ever even getting to know what happened. As such, groups have sprung up to try and reconnect Brethren to their families and hopefully get them a dinner that didn't come out of a dumpster. Why not toss a subscribe our way and join our group here? Our teachings are scary videos every day, and the only thing you have to give us is a subscribe, and if you're feeling really generous, maybe a like too. Let's keep going. Number 4, Happy Science. Happy Science, formerly known as the Institute for Research in Human Happiness,
is a Japanese New Age religion that's sort of a loot bag for as many religious concepts as you can think of. In Happy Science, all gods that have been worshipped throughout history across various religions were actually all the same god, named El Cantare, roughly translating to the singer. The group's founder, Ryoho Okawa, just happens to be the incarnation of all these holy deities manifested as one man. He also claims to have the energies of various celebrities inside him, including Freddie Mercury and former US presidents. The group preaches happiness, obviously. Following the group's mantra, in order to obtain happiness, one must practice the principles of happiness known as the fourfold path: love that gives, wisdom, self-reflection, and progress. Now, Happy Science isn't just some fringe group in a tent in the backwoods. Rough estimates suggest that the group pulls inwards of $45 million a year. Sounds like there's some kind of profit happening here. That's a little pun for you. Happy Science has a full-on media division, producing several animated and live-action films, and publishing books numbering close to the thousands, mostly being transcriptions of Okawa's lectures about happiness, spirituality, and occasionally aliens, as a major part of the group's belief revolve around UFOs, aliens, and other cosmic entities. The group is fairly widespread, boasting temples across the world and various continents. The group's statistics claim that there are 11 million members worldwide, although more conservative estimates put it around 30,000 worldwide. Regardless, Happy Science is something that's clearly making a lot of people happy.
Coming in at number 3, Eyes Wide Shut, 1999.
May I have the password, please?
Which is perhaps the most traditional depiction of horror movie cults on this list, because there's nothing quite as visually iconic as a dimly lit room and a bunch of cultists dressed in flowing robes and porcelain masks, right? And for many people, Eyes Wide Shut is perhaps the quintessential cultish cautionary tale that very aptly spells out the fact that you should always be careful what you wish for, particularly if you're Tom Cruise. And it's also important to note that this film has caused so many conspiracy theories since its release in 1999 that it's pretty much considered to be a cult in its own right. But I'll leave that one down to your own interpretation. Written and directed by the legendary Stanley Kubrick in his last ever film before his death, Eyes Wide Shut tells the tale of a curious doctor who slowly finds himself roped in with a mass secret society that has a thing or two for theatrics after discovering that him and his wife are going through a few crises of fidelity, to say the least. The thing is, there is so much to this movie that you can take the cult that comes with it in many different fashions. Depending on how you see the inner workings of the background of this movie, it may just be a bizarre tale of adultery and lust, but sometimes if you look deeper, switching the lens as we can often do with Kubrick's cinematic works, you'll see suspicion in every background actor and in every out of place frame. You'll see moments of deception, human sacrifice, ritualistic symbology. This film really is that good, and whilst the proverbial cult isn't as explicit as in other films, Eyes Wide Shut is perhaps the starkest depiction of a very human conspiracy. Swinging in at our number 2 spot, The Void, 2016. And it was only a matter of time before a Lovecraftian tentacle-worshipping sect of hooded cosmic void priests showed up, right? After all, isn't that what you came here for? Now, for the most part, 2016's The Void is an incredibly underrated horror movie, but as far as cults go, it's perhaps one of modern horror cinema's very best, and it does that with only a few handful of scenes, all of which are equally terrifying and equally awesome, may I add. If what you want from a cultist depiction of horror cinema is an ominous cabal of hooded figures holding torches on the horizon with the intention of summoning forth the end of all things through tentacled deities, dark skies and vistas of black pyramid empires, then look no further, because 2016's The Void is exactly that. Written and directed by Steven Kostanski and Jeremy Gillespie, we've covered 2016's The Void quite a few times on this channel, so we won't harp on too much about its artistic merit and rightful place as one of the best horror movies of this decade. But for those of you that haven't seen it, The Void is pretty straightforward in its execution. Cosmic void cult takes over a small town. No one, including the audience, realizes that survivors get trapped in the local hospital, slowly getting picked apart as a metaphorical and literal box of tentacled horrors gets unleashed. If you came for cults, The Void has them in spades. Give it a watch. You won't be disappointed. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, Suspiria, 1977. And whilst technically not a cult in the conventional sense, as it's a coven of mystical and mortal witches wrapped up in a supernatural conspiracy, there's no denying that perhaps the most perfect unraveling of an occult mystery in horror cinema comes within the beautifully vivid and equally horrifying events of Dario Argento's giallo masterpiece, Suspiria. Written and directed by Dario Argento and partly based on Thomas de Quincey's 1845 essay Suspiria de Profundis, this film is a mystery wrapped up in an enigma, stacked with symbology from the off, as well as also being one of the most visually pleasing horror movies of all time. But more importantly, it defined an entire age of horror fans and warned them to always check the credentials of the establishment the next time you sign up for ballet lessons. There are so many twists and turns in this film that I feel I won't be spoiling it by telling you there's a cult somehow involved, because although part of the experience is in the slow unraveling of the events of Suspiria, from the off you know that something is up with the Tanz Dance Academy, and that's pretty much established in the film's opening moments. What sets this particular strange establishment apart though is the pure ancestry that Suspiria alludes to. How far deep is this coven rooted? How vast is its network? And for many of us, these questions only serve to permeate more questions, and it's perhaps the main reason why Dario Argento's 1977 classic is still so important to horror cinema to this day. A coven cult. Of course it's number one.
Number 3 on this list is Anna LeBaron. A lot of people get poached at a young age to join cults. It's pretty easy to do that poaching if you can start from birth. Anna LeBaron's father, Ervil, was the leader of a cult that's been linked to over 20 murders. Her father had 13 wives and over 50 children between them all. Anna, in the book that she's written called The Polygamist's Daughter, details how she and the other children were made to feel isolated and were forced to work 12-hour workdays. Her father was wanted by the FBI for organizing the murders of over 10 people. He was eventually captured, but even after his capture, his followers continued to kill. He had made a master kill list and his devout troops were following it. Luckily, at the age of 13, Anna was able to escape with the help of her sister. She went on to go to college and live a relatively normal life, which is kind of crazy to think about considering how her existence started. Number 2 on this list is Clare Ashman. Clare, as many followers of cults are, was poached at a young age and just found herself involved in something that she never wanted to be a part of. The list verse says, Clare Ashman grew up in the very traditional Catholic society of St. Pius X. When she left her family and started life outside the strictly Latin faith, she was confused and unsure of herself. In many ways, she was clueless and uneducated by her family. That explains why, when she turned 15, she was not aware that it was creepy for a 27-year-old man to show interest in her. Unfortunately, without healthy relationships for her to learn from, Clare accepted a marriage proposal from the man. Shortly after their marriage, her husband discovered the Order of St. Charbel, and Clare found herself smack in the middle of a doomsday cult. Clare was even more confused when she was selected as a princess of the church and was destined to marry the cult leader. For 6 years, she grappled with the controlling hand of the church and her husband, until one day she got her hands on a book called The Beautiful Side of Evil, which first unveiled the term cult to Clare. She understood at once that she was in a cult and began learning about how to open a bank account, how to sign a lease on an apartment, and how to be free. After learning more about how to survive outside the cult, Clare escaped. She now hopes her retelling of her experiences can help other women find a better life. Imagine getting married to this guy who basically groomed you from when you were 15 and then getting told that you're actually gonna get married off to some other dude. Meanwhile, you have no idea what a bank account is or like actual real life is. It's so good that she found that book and was able to realize that this isn't how life is supposed to go. I can't imagine how bad things would have got if she had never found it. And finally, number 1 on this list is Rebecca Stott. Rebecca is once again another story of someone being born into this and just thinking that this is what life is like until finally being told otherwise. List verse says, author of In the Days of Rain, A Daughter, A Father, A Cult, Rebecca opens up about her upbringing. She and her families were members of a religious cult, the Exclusive Brethren. In an interview with NPR, Rebecca stated that rules were enforced with intense interrogations about your sins and that punishments would often include isolation that could go on for weeks. Rebecca details the anger she was forced to bottle up and how silent she was forced to be around men. When the cult leader, Jim Taylor Jr., was found sleeping with a young married member, the entire cult ruptured. 8,000 members left the cult, including Rebecca's family. But that did not mean her hardships were over. Rebecca described the overwhelmingness of the outside world world with a sense of vertigo. All the rules of her old life spun around as she took more and more steps away from their binds. It took a very long time for Rebecca to grow less shell-shocked by the world, and to this day she cannot bring herself to open a Bible, which makes a lot of sense. By the time Rebecca was just 6, she had undergone at least 3,000 hours of forced Bible study. Being born into something like that must be so hard. I imagine that she's dealt with feelings of inadequacy her whole life. Also, getting shoved inside an isolated room for time if you misbehaved is pretty whack, guys, and not something that anybody should want to be a part of. Very glad that Rebecca managed to make it out with her life still left to live.
Number 3. Raelism. Raelism is the teaching that humanity was birthed by a hyper-advanced race of aliens called the Elohim, who genetically engineered us as their children. Our most famous religious leaders over the years were Elohim human hybrids, whose wondrous abilities and powers were mislabeled as prophets. It's said that by 2035, if Raelism's followers have achieved the tenets correctly and fulfilled the movement's teaching by spreading its message and building an embassy to welcome its 39 prophets, the group rose to prominence in the 1970s when its leader, Claude Briell, who called himself Rayo, claims he had an experience with a UFO where a spacecraft flying overhead was full of beings who told him about humanity's future and past and handed him a Bible and told him it was his mission to build that embassy. Now, all of this sounds like pretty standard cult stuff, worshipping aliens who are secret progenitors, but where things get pretty interesting and worthy of note is that around 2002, a company called Clonaid, with direct ties to Raelism, claimed to have done the impossible and cloned a baby girl, appropriately named Eve. Immediately, it spurned all kind of controversy, led to several investigations, discussions about the ethics and morality of the situation. But despite all this, no actual evidence of the clone baby ever came up. Eve isn't the only alleged baby birthed this way through Clonaid, with several claims of Clonaid brand clones being produced since the original story in 2002, all with dubious claims, including controversial rapper Kid Buu, who claims to have been born there. So either Eve is still hiding somewhere, or maybe it was a bit of an exaggeration. Regardless, Clonaid charges up to $200,000 for their services, which might seem a bit expensive, but hey, you're getting a great deal on a clone. You're gonna make your money back on that. So if anyone's got a piggy bank just weighing them down, please send me a message and then get back to me and introduce me to you and your clone. Number 2, the Church of Bible Understanding. Hey, real quick for me, what's your favorite Seinfeld episode? Yeah, I probably could have guessed it was the comeback or the contest, and those are both great answers. But what about the checks, where George gets involved with that group of carpet cleaners who end up trying to recruit for a cult, and he's all mad they want his boss, but they don't want him? That's the kind of shenanigan that could only happen to Costanza. Turns out that episode was based on a real group called the Church of Bible Understanding, although at the time they were going by Christian Brothers Carpet Cleaners, no doubt where the idea came from. This undertaking was one of the group's many noble business ventures, including a used van business and a New York chain of used antique stores. Like most cults, the group was led by a charismatic figurehead, one Stuart Trail, who maintained to his followers that only he was capable of understanding the Word of God and understanding how to annoy George Costanza. Their leader was expelled from the Pentecostal church he worshipped at in the early 70s, and after his expulsion, refused to give up the dream and formed his own church, promising a communal lifestyle of salvation. And if reports from former members are to be believed, hard work for below minimum wage. Members were isolated from their friends, families, and communities and encouraged to devote themselves wholly to the church. Besides a less than flattering appearance on Seinfeld, the group most recently made headlines after an orphanage they built in Haiti had burned to the ground, after several claims that orphanages the group had been producing in Haiti had been extremely substandard, shoddy, overcrowded, and dirty. The leader, Stuart Trail, passed away in 2018. Current estimates suggested the group has dwindled down from thousands of members in its heyday to just dozens now. And there's no word if Larry David was ever a member or associated. Number 1, the Nuwaubian Nation. Dwight York had a dream. Like many Americans, he believed in simple things, like amassing an army to help him fight Satan amongst the stars. Let me back that up for you just a little bit and introduce you to the Nuwaubian Nation, or the United Nuwaubian Nation of Moors. Adding just a twist of Christianity, African rituals, and a heavy dose of Egyptian mythology mixed with aliens, Dwight York had a perfect recipe for a wild cult story. The nation believed that they needed to prepare themselves for an inevitable duel of the fates among the stars, and that the 144,000 chosen ones would accompany Dwight into outer space for the fate of the galaxy, zooming away on a flying city to Orion to fight Satan. Now, I have no comment about any of that. Maybe it was the cult of personality, maybe it was the promise that you could potentially get involved in a Star War, but this was a surprisingly popular movement around rural Georgia, where York built up a massive compound that looked a bit like a pavilion out of your favorite Egypt-themed amusement park, and bringing in members in droves. As the numbers grew, the mythology grew, incorporating cloning, racial theory, anti-government conspiracy, and a whole lot more. But the dreams of the Starfarers would be cut short when an investigation in 2002 revealed a horrifying truth: that their leader Dwight York was involved in a massive human trafficking operation said to have been comprised of as many of 1,000 people. On May 8, 2002, the Sheriff's Department of Georgia, with the aid of the FBI, shut the entire operation down. York was arrested and sentenced to a life sentence where he's still serving out his 135 years. One Georgia sheriff involved, Sheriff Sills, described the trafficking operation as the best kept secret in Georgia I'd seen in my 47 years as a police officer. The compound was seized and swiftly destroyed. Despite all this though, there are still members out there waiting.